Chapter 704. Nongju stood there for a long time with a complicated expression. Then, she walked away resolutely, threw out a ship-shaped flying celestial device, and jumped on it. Nongju stood at the bow of the ship with her back to Bai Changchun, motionless and silent. Chapter 705. Qianqiu sighed slightly and pushed Furong and both Lu Yanqing and flying celestial device. Yan Zhuixing and Xi and Lao San was at a probably escaped, while Zi kept looking back with tears in her eyes. They couldn't find them under such a large-scale search. After Qianqiu half-forcibly put them on the celestial device, finding them again was Zi finally couldn't help but kneel down. Xi and Lao San refused to give up. She leaned on the string of the ship and cried bitterly. He led the disciples of Lingfang Valley, no matter how sad Zi to continue searching frantically. The celestial device flew into the sky with a whoosh. His feelings. Nongju didn't look back. 3 of his brothers had died, and one of them might even say a word. How could he not be anxious? She just stood straight at the bow of the ship and drove the celestial device stood in front of the cliff under the setting sun. Qianqiu quietly walked to Bai Changchun and said, the other graceful, they're gone. The lush Lingfang Valley was dyed with a layer of red and yellow by the setting sun. With Bai Changchun's for the next few days, how could he not know that stood here most of the time? Bai Changchun at the deserted Lingfang Valley with a frown, expressionlessly and nodded. When Lanfeng sighed softly, Qianqiu took a few steps back, since it's already happened, his hands and bowed to him solemnly. The eldest, when he straightened up again, fourth, the person in front of him had already disappeared. A black spot in the sky quickly disappeared towards the east. I can't even protect the disciples under my nose. Suddenly became very quiet. I'm sorry. Qianqiu slowly turned around and looked around. Second, fourth, and eighth going out to collect herbs recently. The 1,000-mile lake was still sparkling. The wind shook her head in pain, and the grass and trees on the island were still lush and swaying gently. It's not your fault. When his eyes fell on the big house in the center of the island, escaped from cornucopia. He would hide in your man who had been sitting in the house for thousands of years had really he would have attracted a group of people to hunt him down. This place belonged to him now. How could we allow him to cause trouble here? He actually became the master of this place. Lu Yanqing muttered to herself, if I didn't stop he was now the 108th torture master of the demon ghost region. Do you remember what Qianqiu said suddenly felt suffocated? He said, he suddenly turned to the Ice Palace and shouted loudly, Master, if the people of Ice Palace hurt Lingfang Valley in the future, I hope you won't regret it. He suddenly ran to the lakeside, opened his arms and sang loudly toward the boundless 1,000-mile lake. It's really a great river flows to the east. Unfortunately, the stars in the sky joined the Big Dipper. When Lanfeng, don't you think we're leaving just like that? When Lanfeng was startled, I have it, we have it all. That's not true. Seeing injustice to that guy's nonsense, he roared. Speaking of time to make a move, Lu Yanqing seemed to have thought of something. Rushing through the 9 prefectures, her self-reproachful expression became a little more restrained. And she said in a bleak tone, I reckon that Lao San is no longer in the Lingfang Valley. Let your Wen family's disciples withdraw. CK your mother. Bai Changchun is about to finish his song, and many people are rushing to see him off. After you should also go and see him and scolding. He finally felt a lot more comfortable in his heart. If you don't look for it, then there's no began to calm down. When Lanfeng tactfully by the side of the 1,000-mile lake and gazed into the distance, he also wanted to take this opportunity to blush on his cheeks gradually faded away and returned to normal. Lu Yanqing still wanted to persuade him, lest by chance he couldn't help but pure white magnolia flowers. Everyone knows what those people are going to send by bathing in sunlight and gently swaying. As the two of them personally move, they began to enter the Snow White demon realm stood under the tree in a reserved under the night sky. Otherwise, she looked even more delicate than Mulan. There were undulating on the branch. Looking at the lonely silhouette by the lake, and some were flat. He hesitated for a long time under the cover of the white snow. He came to the back of Qianqiu and asked softly, forming a gentle and beautiful white envoy left. The bright moonlight reflected off the pure white snow. His voice was trembling, forming a silver light all over the mountains. She clearly saw what happened here just now. This was a world of snow. She saw what she shouldn't have seen, called this and heard what she shouldn't have heard. On the highest peak of the towering mountain, so she was naturally more sensible than had stood tall. Although she didn't know where Bai Changchun was sparkling, she vaguely guessed that he wouldn't come poignant beauty on the peak of the mountain. Qianqiu snorted and this seemingly cold ice palace, his calm face, which was loose on the outside but tense on the inside, instantly changed and became covered with a layer of Bing Qingzi were carefully watching the outside of the palace, and terrifying aura instantly erupted from his upright body and directly anxiously paced back and forth in the palace. Endless coldness. Endless he was despair, able to come here thanks to the 2 disciples of Bing Qingzi. All kinds of extremely terrifying negative emotions directly and a group of old subordinates who risked their lives to escort him out of the limitless island. Almost instantly lost her desire to live the moment he arrived here. He coincidentally saw Yan Zhuixing, she directly knelt on the ground by Bing Qingzi. Her eyes were wide open for a father and she looked at Qianqiu with infinite fear. But Yan Zhuixing's appearance really shocked. She had never imagined that the amiable Mr. Yu would be so haggard and had lost an arm. Just the instantly made Yan Bugui's heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. Just how terrifying was the cultivation he was concealing. His home was gone, and the limitless island was gone. She had never seen such a terrifying aura in her life. If his son was gone, he really didn't know where to go. Today was the first time in her life that the man in front of her suddenly made her feel that he was even more terrifying than the Lord Torture Envoy. And there was no news at all. slowly turned around and stared at Lady Anxious, who was kneeling on the ground. Below the ice palace, he said indifferently with no expression on his face, it was covered by a soundproof enchantment. Do you have any ideas? Inside the soundproof enchantment, the smell of blood was so strong that it was pungent, and there was an endless mournful scream, which made one's hair stand on end. I was wrong. Bing Xingzi looked at Yan Juixing, who was in a small blood pool in front of him with a solemn face. Lady Mu's face was pale, but she forced herself not to collapse and tried hard to reply. She knew that she had asked naked body was soaked in the blood pool, and the blood had submerged up to his chest. The man in front of her could take her life at any time. He was crazily shaking his head and screaming in the blood pool. It would be as easy as killing an ant. His face was hideous. She didn't need to doubt him at all. And he seemed to be in extreme pain. From today onwards, at the place where one of his arms was cut off, of the demon more than half of his arm had already grown out. Yu Qianqiu turned around and faced the 1,000-mile lake where his arm was cut off. With his back granules wriggling disgustingly, he said, "Do you have any objections?" Which was disgusting to look at. Trembled and bowed. He was using the blood demon body refining technique to regrow his lost arm. Even though my respects to the Lord Torture Envoy, after listening to Yan Juixing's mournful scream for a whole day, she suddenly felt that the terrifying aura had suddenly become stronger. However, for Yan Juixing's it was safety, so strong that she didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting. He really couldn't let any accidents happen to him. She found that the sun was still high in the sky. He had to thank Bai Changchun for successfully saving Yan Juixing this time. She checked her physical condition and found that there was nothing wrong with her keeping all the being a little quiet. It would have been really difficult for him to successfully bring Yan Juixing had already spared her. After receiving the distress message and found that Yan Juixing, who was still standing by the lake, he rushed over at top speed. She immediately got up and knelt down. Coincidentally, the Spirit Fong Valley was conducting a large-scale search of my life. The seriously injured Yan Juixing was hiding here and there, not knowing where to hide. Yu Qianqiu turned around and chuckled. Bing Xingzi's timely appearance resolved the crisis. He took off his clothes and jumped into the lake. With his profound cultivation, 2 rounds he quietly brought Yan Juixing back. Lady Mu was stunned. In fact, she couldn't get used to the Lord Torture Envoy's reaction for escaping capture. But she understood what he meant by a massage. If it wasn't for Third Xian's familiarity, she immediately walked to the lakeside and gently took off helping Yan Juixing hold on until the blink of an eye arrived. An alluring and delicate body appeared. Speaking of which, slowly walked into the lake, still had with a wave of her hand, and that was when out a half-exposed rock on the lake surface. Fortunately, when Lanfeng turned around about Lu Yanqing and kept lying directly on the rock. If when Lanfeng had also body was on the rock in the search of the mountain, while the other half was exposed to the sun, would probably not have escaped when Lanfeng's notice. Lady Mu leaned over and let him massage her slender fingers. Could only mean that Yan Juixing was not fated to die. My lord, how's the strength? A day later, the scream in the secret room narrowed his eyes and grunted. In the blood pool, he seemed to be enjoying it very much. Who was covered in blood, opened his mind was filled with all sorts of without concealment. I don't have to be cautious in Shuntian Island bowed to Bing Xingzi and said, I'm in charge of my territory, master. How great. Otherwise, his head, which was resting on his arms, tilted over and said, you should have used the protective go find the demon I gave you and the ghost king to get some fresh fruits. Why did you have to use it only when you had no other choice? Use a little more strength. Bing Xingzi casually scolded him and did not say much. Lady Mu didn't show any abnormality on her face. But then he slightly frowned and said, but she was filled with caution and reverence in her heart. Why did it drop? She was ready to sacrifice herself at any body refining technique, but Yu Qianqiu didn't seem to have any intention of touching her at all. It also causes great damage to the cultivation. The demon domain became someone's territory. It is expected that my cultivation would drop from the middle stage of crossing calamity upside down and created an unprecedented scene in the demon domain. If it wasn't sunbathing in a 1,000-mile how could I do being massaged by beauties? Yan Juixing suddenly opened his arms and roared madly. The big house in the center of the island silently watched the lively scene by the lake. Yu Qianqiu could not hear the door seemed to be letting out a soundless otherwise, he would definitely jump up and say, of the who's afraid of her? The flames of war reached the sky. Because he did not expect Yan Juixing to let him go, pointed his sword. The army were sworn enemies. He would continue to fight to the death. Didn't even have the strength to fight back. In the big house of the demon ghost region, the overwhelming victory was lying on the ground, army very but there was an elastic thigh under his head. They played a triumphant song all the way. At this time, they attacked cities and conquered carrying a plate of red as if they were taking something out of them one by one and the territory they occupied kept expanding. The latter smacked his lips a few times, had long been in a waved his hand to stop the hands that continued to send him red recruited able-bodied men to replenish the army that was constantly he leaned against the door frame to protect the shrinking spat out the fruit skin, and looked around aimlessly. The empire was on the verge of collapse, he was really bored and the hearts of the people were changing. He had no choice. Who could turn the tide for the rotten regime? Although there were beauties serving him and his life was comfortable, there were only two people on the island from the sidelines. After a few days, they were somewhat curious found as to why the Fujian Island hadn't taken any action yet. As a new official, he also wanted to guard the demon ghost region majestically like by Changchun and have a taste of being a torture envoy. When the news that Shi Wenguang's backer was Yu Qianzhou found that it was a mistake to learn from Bai Changchun came to a sudden realization. Bai Changchun could stay here year after year, but he found that he lost his patience Island had no choice but to swallow their anger. How was this different from being in jail? The Fujian Island became the joke of the cellmates would brag. But Miss Mu was not one to brag. They had unceremoniously expelled Yu Qianzhou from the sect. Yu Qianzhou they were finally going to drink the bitter wine that they brewed and muttered to himself. However, then the attention of the various sects quickly shifted away from this matter. Miss Mu's expression no one cared about the war in the secular world anymore. The new torture envoy had indeed concealed his cultivation suddenly spread from the various countries. He was not as superficial as he usually appeared, like wildfire, but had hidden his strength well. It was hard for the Huaxia cultivation world. There was an island named Xianxian. The number one expert in the territory of Nanming ancestor was going to enter the four great men of the cultivation world. Since the news was shrouded in smoke all year round, and outs of the matter were quickly investigated, and the sound of knocking could be heard. The various sects in the Huaxia cultivation world finally understood that the number one expert in the world dressed in a green robe stood alone with his hands behind his back. He had been secretly protecting Huaxia. His eyes were slightly closed on his thin face. The soul formation experts of the various countries hadn't made a move for the opening of the East Holy Land. However, once Bai Changchun left, he opened his eyes various and countries would definitely launch an all-out attack on the Huaxia cultivation world. What are you doing here? For a person suddenly appeared behind Huaxia panicked. At this moment, they knew that their good days were coming to an end, not moving at all. At this moment, even various countries were forcefully restraining their disciples. This person was none other than Yu Qianzhou. Ordered them not to cause any trouble. After finding his master's location, they would be severely punished. And before he could react, this was because Bai Changchun discovered that the surrounding air currents had suddenly moved. At this critical moment of his departure, down on him like metal, it was possible making him unable to reorganize the cultivation world. He did not even have a chance to resist. This was not because Bai Changchun had discovered it early. It was very possible. Otherwise, whenever someone had involved Bai Changchun behind him, the commotion caused would make everyone tremble and might have become a meat patty. Therefore, no one wanted to provoke Bai Changchun at this moment, and Yu Qianzhou regained his freedom. The entire cultivation world panted and said, "Master, I'm here to send you off." Everyone was polite and lived in harmony. Why did you attack me? However, there was also a place that was not peaceful, and it felt like within the borders of taken as malicious intent. All the disciples of Lingfang Valley, he did together with the thousands of Wen clan disciples in this world who could get close to Bai Changchun searching back and forth within Lingfang Valley. He had suddenly appeared out of thin air in Utopia. They almost turned over every barren mountain and remote corner. Thus, Bai Changchun had subconsciously treated him as an expert and reacted immediately. And Yan Zhuixing, luckily, had stolen the seven-star blood did not cause any mishaps, seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Bai Changchun had never wasted a trace of them on such topics, and he could not be bothered to explain to him. He asked expressionlessly, "Is this the miraculous effect you mentioned when you gave me those silver balls?" Chapter 706. Yes, Master. Yu Qianzhou's face was full of pride, as if he was asking. Awesome, right? Bai Changchun nodded slightly and turned around expressionlessly, as if he had no interest in this kind of thing. This immediately dampened Yu Qianzhou's enthusiasm. If anyone knew that the golden bead had such a magical function, wouldn't they ask until the very end? Who would be as indifferent as him? Whoosh whoosh. A gust of wind from the south suddenly blew, and the hazy red fog that enveloped the island slowly drifted to the north. Yu Qianzhou stood behind Bai Changchun and looked around. The fog dispersed. His vision gradually became clear, and the appearance of the entire Xianxian island appeared in front of him. Master, is this Xianxian island? Yu Qianzhou looked around and asked. Bai Changchun softly replied with a "hmm." Suddenly, Yu Qianzhou's pupils shrank. Bai Changchun was facing the east, and there was a vast expanse of white fog. It was boundless, and it was connected to the sea and the sky. No one knew how big the area was. Compared to this boundless sea of fog, Xianxian Island was probably not even a small place. The two were separated by the sea, and the distance between them might be less than 10 miles. The wind blew away the surrounding fog, but it couldn't blow away the vast sea of fog in front of it. It was ethereal, serene, and mysterious. That is the East Holy Land? Yu Qianzhou murmured. Bai Changchun once again replied with a and looked down the mountain. Yu Qianzhou subconsciously followed his gaze and saw two figures rushing over. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the top of the mountain. When one of them saw Yu Qianzhou, he and Yu Qianzhou spoke at the same time. Why are you here? This person was none other than Nongzhu. After he made arrangements for Zi and Furong, he immediately rushed over here. However, after the two of them asked, they didn't reply and turned their heads to the side like enemies. The man standing next to Nongzhu was sizing up Yu Qianzhou, and Yu Qianzhou was also attracted by his weird costume. It was a tall, barefooted old man. His face was old, but his body was muscular and his skin was bronze. His face was full of whiskers, each strand of hair standing straight up like a hedgehog. What was even more spectacular was that his hair, beard, and eyebrows were all crimson red. He was only wearing a pair of large underpants, and the underpants were also red. He had the appearance of a strange person. The old man opened his big eyes and looked at Yu Qianzhou curiously. Nongzhu, who is this? I don't think I've seen him before. He looks unfamiliar. He found it strange. There were only a handful of people in the world who were qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun and speak. Furthermore, this person looked so young, and he immediately suspected that he was Bai Changchun's disciple. Nongzhu chuckled and said, Old man Nan Ming, take a guess. His words immediately confirmed Yu Qianzhou's guess. He immediately bowed and said, Junior Yu Qianzhou greets Nan Ming ancestor. Nan Ming ancestor was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and said, I knew it. No wonder you're Bai Changchun's disciple. No wonder you could break into Xian Island without being discovered. I was reckless. Yu Qianzhou was unusually humble. Nan Ming ancestor waved his hand and said, It's all right, it's all right. I've long heard of your name. Now that I've seen you today, you really live up to your reputation. He was a little tired. Why couldn't he see through his cultivation? Nongzhu also felt that it was a little strange. With Yu Qianzhou's cultivation, he shouldn't be able to hide from the protection of Xian Island, right? Nan Ming ancestor was a straightforward person. He couldn't figure it out, so he couldn't help but ask, Yu Qianzhou, what's your cultivation? I'm a little clumsy to not be able to see through your cultivation. Nongzhu chuckled and thought, it would be strange if you could see through it. Even Bai Changchun couldn't see through it. Yu Qianzhou rolled his eyes at him. He then took out a porcelain bottle from his storage bag and respectfully gave it to Nan Ming ancestor. He said, I've just arrived here, so I didn't prepare anything because I came in a hurry. Here is a bottle of breath-concealing pill that I personally refined. After taking one, you can hide your cultivation for 10 days. I have no respect for you. It's just a breath-concealing pill, so please accept it. Nan Ming ancestor revealed an expression of understanding. At the same time, he was very satisfied with this kid who gave him a gift as soon as he met him. He then reached out to take it and said, Then I won't stand on ceremony. If you have time, come to Xian Island to play. Although breath-concealing pill wasn't a miraculous pill, it was a rare item that had long been lost. With a bottle in hand, it might come in handy in the future. Naturally, he had to accept it. Nongzhu, who was at the side, was unhappy. She pulled a long face and said in a deep voice, You promised to give me a bottle, but you haven't given it to me yet. Are you going to drag it until? Before he could finish, Yu Qianzhou threw a porcelain bottle at him and stopped him from talking nonsense. Nan Ming ancestor raised his red eyebrows. He could tell that these two guys didn't get along. Coincidentally, he and Nongzhu didn't get along well either. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. He immediately laughed and patted Yu Qianzhou's shoulder, praising, Not bad, not bad. Half of Yu Qianzhou's body trembled from the slap, but he still squeezed out an awkward smile and said, Senior, you flatter me, you flatter me. Bai Changchun quietly faced the vast sea of fog, turning a deaf ear to the conversation between the three. 100 miles away from Xian Island, there were more than 10 large flying artifacts floating in the sky and sea. These flying magic tools were all soul formation stage lords from various countries. There were more than 100 of them, and they were all gathered together in their respective circles. For example, Pei Fong, Qi Zhejuan, and O Yangda were all there. The blue sky and white clouds floated, and the blue sea surged. The scenery was really good. However, everyone's attention wasn't on this. Most of the time, they were focused on the vast sea of fog between the blue sea and blue sky. However, they didn't see any movement until now. O Yangda, who was standing side by side with Pei Fong and Qi Zhejuan, suddenly turned around and walked away. He flicked his sleeves and said, "When is this damn East Holy Land going to open? We've waited for more than 10 days, why is there still no movement?" Pei Fong squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. He hugged his stomach and laughed, "Old Ouyang, don't be impatient. Isn't Bai Changchun already at Xian Island? Since he's here, it means that the East Holy Land is going to open soon." Qi Zhejuan turned around expressionlessly and said, "We've already waited for so many years, why would we care about waiting for a few more days?" He had always been like this. No matter what, there was almost no expression on his face. Although the three of them had been together for a long time, their temperaments and personalities had never been affected by one another. Pei Fong always had a smile on his face. The other two didn't talk much, but O Yangda's temper was a little fiery, and Qi Zhejuan's thoughts were always hard to guess. He was always cold and calm. There was no one else on the flying artifact that the three demigod final stage experts were on. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many people qualified to stand with them. If they weren't summoned by them, how many people would be able to participate in the conversation between the three of them? The former top 10 experts were now incomplete. Of course, Bai Changchun was an exception, because the situation was just the opposite. It wasn't that Bai Changchun wasn't qualified to talk to the three of them, but the three of them weren't qualified to talk to Bai Changchun. As for the others, Wen Lanfeng and Bing Qingzi didn't come. The one who came, Hu Changshou, was standing with a group of demigod mid-stage lords with a gloomy face. However, he didn't seem to have anything in common with them, so it was very awkward. Haha. Look at how ugly Hu Changshou's face is. Pei Fong glanced at them and laughed. The other two looked over as well, and they snorted disdainfully. At this moment, the 100 or so spirit-severing lords all turned around to look at the source of the voice. They saw a dense group of flying artifacts coming from behind. Everyone looked at each other. Someone asked curiously, "Why are there so many people? Who's here to join in the fun?" Everyone was confused. Obviously, they didn't know. However, when those flying artifacts got closer, the demigod lords were speechless. There were at least 300 to 400 flying artifacts, and the cultivation of the people standing on them was too low for them to look at. The highest cultivation was at the end of the tribulation passing stage, and there were many at the tribulation passing stage. There were also many at the nascent soul stage. Everyone looked at each other and asked each other which sect they were from, but they all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't know them. Suddenly, someone said in surprise, "Look at their clothes. They seem to be from the Huaxia cultivation world." On one of the artifacts, Yunnan Tian, who was dressed in a snow-white fluffy robe, walked to the back of the ship and asked indifferently, "Who are you? Come forward and answer me." Although his voice was soft, it penetrated the group of people who were dozens of meters away. Those people seemed to stop when they saw the people here. They all looked surprised because no one could see the cultivation of any of the people on the flying artifacts in front of them. When they heard the question, they gathered again. When they were about 10 meters away, a flying artifact appeared with 5 to 6 people on it. It was the people from Fuxian Island. Feng Xiangtian walked to the front of the ship and forced himself to calm down. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. I'm here to send off Senior Bai. May I know who you are?" He had already vaguely guessed who these people were. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid, but he was the sect leader of the #1 sect in Huaxia. How could he show weakness in front of everyone? As soon as he finished speaking, the lords of the various countries burst into laughter, all of them shaking their heads with mocking expressions. The hundreds of people didn't care about the thousands of people standing in front of them at all. Someone even insulted, "They really don't know what's good for them. How dare they come here to die?" The elegant Yunnan looked back at the person who spoke and realized that it was Yan Ji from Shushui country. He sneered, "Yan Ji, if you really have the ability, why don't you go out and kill them all now? It's a piece of cake to kill them." Yan Ji was suddenly stunned. Then, he flew into a rage and said, "Yunnan, what do you mean?" Yunnan said with a faint smile, "I don't mean anything. I just want to fulfill your wish. If you don't dare to, don't say such shameless words." Yan Ji wanted to say something but was stopped by Hua Zongming and the others. Bai Changchun hadn't left yet. If Yan Ji started killing the people of Huaxia cultivation world now, Bai Changchun would probably start killing soon. Chapter 707. Yunnan ignored Yan Ji and turned to Feng Xiangtian with a smile. "So you're Huaxia cultivators, please go ahead." He didn't introduce himself and everyone else, as he didn't want to waste time talking. After all, the difference in cultivation was too big. The so-called supporting Immortal Island sect leader wasn't even worth mentioning in his eyes. But then again, with his identity, he was already very cultured to speak so politely to Feng Xiangtian. Although he didn't say everyone's identity, Feng Xiangtian and the others already knew. Especially when the two of them were arguing just now, Yunnan and Yan Ji's names made the Huaxia cultivators' hearts jump. These were the names of the soul formation realm lords of the various countries. "Then I won't disturb you all." Feng Xiangtian didn't dare to show any temper. He cupped his hands at Yunnan and the others respectfully. He led the group of people and turned, wanting to go around these terrifying people. The various countries' lords looked at these Huaxia cultivators who were trembling like chickens and sneered. It wasn't convenient to touch them now, but once Bai Changchun went to the East Holy Land, these people would undoubtedly be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They wouldn't be able to run even if they wanted to. Hua Zongming, who was holding Yan Ji, looked at the Huaxia cultivators floating away in front of him expressionlessly. However, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw that there were several women standing on one of the flying artifacts. One of them was a woman dressed in white. She was a rare beauty in this world. He couldn't help but shout, "Stop!" The various countries' lords all looked at Hua Zongming. Yan Ji, who was beside him, was even more confused. This guy told him that now wasn't the time to cause trouble, so why did he start again? The Huaxia cultivators all stopped in fear. The leading flying artifact from supporting Immortal Island floated back. Feng Xiangtian braced himself and asked Hua Zongming, "May I know what advice this senior has for us?" He had no choice but to stand up for Hua Zongming. After all, he was the sect master of the number one sect. Hua Zongming, who was wearing light yellow thin clothes and barefooted, waved his hand in an elegant manner and said, "It's none of your business." His eyes were fixed on the beautiful woman in the crowd. Everyone followed his gaze and suddenly came to a realization. He must have seen a stunning beauty. No wonder. It must be known that Hua Zongming was a person who was famous for his love for beauties. His Great Light Palace was called a den of lust behind his back because he kept many beautiful women. It wasn't hard to guess what he liked by looking at his clothes that didn't fit his style. In fact, it wasn't just Hua Zongming. Many people's eyes lit up when they saw that woman. That woman was none other than the leader of the Moon Clan, Chionghua Fairy. She was famous for her looks in the cultivation world of Huaxia. This was also because Bai Hua Fairy wasn't here, otherwise a pair of beauties would definitely be a feast for the eyes. Jade Flower Fairy's expression changed slightly. She naturally noticed Hua Zongming's lecherous gaze, and he was not the only one. Although she was angry, she was even more terrified because she couldn't afford to offend anyone here. He could only tilt his head to the side and pretend that he didn't see anything. The reason why the Huaxia cultivators were here was naturally because they heard that Bai Changchun was going to the Eastern Holy Land. Therefore, the leaders of the various sects contacted each other and came together to see him off, to thank Bai Changchun for protecting the Huaxia cultivation world for so many years. Of course, this was just a nice thing to say. The main reason was that every torture master of the ghost region was a top expert who could shake the cultivation world. The next torture master would probably be no worse. The hundreds of sect leaders had come here and put on such a grand show because they wanted to show respect to Senior Bai. Or rather, they wanted to play the pity card, hoping that Senior Bai could speak to the next enforcer and continue to protect the world of cultivators in Huaxia. According to their thinking, since Bai Changchun could take care of the Huaxia cultivation world for so many years, it was obvious that he had deep feelings for the Huaxia cultivation world. They believed that if they came together to beg him, he wouldn't really ignore them. Therefore, this scene happened. However, their thinking was just wishful thinking. Bai Changchun didn't take care of the Huaxia cultivation world like they thought. First of all, when they saw Bai Changchun later, it was still uncertain whether he would talk to them or not. Second, once Bai Changchun left, it would be difficult for them to leave this place safely. Jade Flower Fairy had just turned her head to one side when a white figure suddenly appeared in front of her. She was a little surprised, but then she saw clearly who it was. It was the elegant man in a fluffy white robe who talked to Feng Shangtian just now. He was looking at her deeply. Jade Flower Fairy was suddenly at a loss. She couldn't scold him, let alone beat him. Sorry to disturb you, Fairy. Yunnan Tian bowed politely and said, I am Yunnan Tian, the Lord of Lu Nangua. It is my honor to meet you today. I wonder if I have the honor to know your name? Jade Flower Fairy bit her lips and bowed, I am Jade Flower, the leader of the Moon Clan. Nice to meet you, Senior. Hua Zongming's face darkened. He didn't expect that Yunnan Tian would take advantage of him after he stopped these people. Among the lords, many people were already snickering. They all knew that Yunnan Tian was not a good guy. There was a reason why he only accepted female disciples in his clan. Those who knew the truth all knew that the relationship between Yunnan Tian and the female disciples he accepted was not clear. It was just that, apart from cultivators at the last stage of the semi-god realm, Yunanshan's cultivation was considered high compared to the other lords. Everyone gave him some face and few people talked nonsense. Haha. Yunnan Tian really doesn't change. Pei Fong smiled at Qi Zhejuan and Ouyangda, who were beside him. He then shouted loudly, Brother Yu, calm down for the time being. If there is anything, we can talk about it later. Please come over and have a chat. He did not want Yunnan Tian to cause any trouble now, lest everyone was implicated. Yunnan Tian glanced at Pei Fong and bowed to Jade Flower Fairy. Oh, the famous Jade Flower Fairy. Nice to meet you. I will talk to you again when I have the chance. After that, he stepped back and teleported to the flying ritual implement where Pei Fong was. He glared at Pei Fong and said grumpily, What's the matter? Pei Fong shouted to the people of the Huaxia cultivation world, Let's go. Don't make trouble for yourselves. As soon as he spoke, no one stopped the Huaxia cultivators. A group of people quickly flew away. At this time, Pei Fong turned to Yunnan Tian and said with a smile, Brother Yu, in terms of appearance, who in the world can compare to Lu Yanqing? As soon as these words came out, many people couldn't help but burst into laughter. Everyone knew that Yunnan Tian had once pursued Lu Yanqing. Unfortunately, he was beaten up by his rival in love, Wen Lanfeng, and almost lost his life. From then on, Yunnan Tian didn't dare to provoke Lu Yanqing anymore. Pei Fong was obviously exposing his shortcomings. Yunnan Tian snorted coldly and flashed back to his original position. At this moment, everyone's laughter stopped abruptly and they looked around. The whistling sound of the wind gradually became louder, and the blowing sea breeze suddenly became stronger. The strange thing was that this wind wasn't from the north, south, east, or west. It was a little messy, and it became more and more vigorous. When it blew on their faces, it felt like something was slapping their faces. The blue sea below lost its rhythm and gradually became turbulent. Just as everyone was looking at each other in dismay, they suddenly heard the faint rumbling of thunder coming from all around them. Everyone quickly looked around and saw dark clouds coming from the horizon. They came from all directions and seemed to be gathering in this direction. Under the dark clouds, ferocious thunderbolts, dragons, snakes, and flood dragons were shining brightly. They connected the sea and the dark clouds in the sky and were moving quickly. The wind became stronger and was close to a storm. The sea was completely angry and set off monstrous waves. The East Holy Land is about to open, Pei Fong said with a smile on his face. What he meant was that Bai Changchun was finally leaving. Oh, Yangda and Qi Zhoujuan nodded slightly. Many people present had seen the opening of the East Holy Land. They all understood that this was a sign of the opening of the East Holy Land. However, none of the Huaxia cultivators had seen it before. Just as they were dozens of miles away from the feudal lords, they suddenly saw such a change in the sky and sea. All of them looked around in bewilderment. The fog that had just shrouded Xian Island was blown away again. Bai Changchun, who was standing on the peak of the mountain, slowly opened his eyes and looked around with radiance. Nongzhu looked at the dark clouds in the sky and muttered to herself, "Is it going to open soon?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded solemnly and said, "Soon." He had lived on Xian Island for such a long time and had seen the opening of the East Holy Land several times. What he said was naturally correct. When Yu Qianzhou heard this, he looked around curiously. He wanted to see how the Holy Land of the East would be opened. Right at this moment, the thunderbolts in the surrounding dark clouds suddenly disappeared at the same time. The wind between heaven and earth swept wildly, and the surrounding dark clouds quickly gathered together. In less than an hour, the entire sky above Xian Island was covered by dark clouds. The last ray of light disappeared, and the world was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Not long after, thunder rumbled in the sky again, and it was getting more and more intense. The dark clouds in the sky flickered, as if they were brewing something. Suddenly, an intense and dazzling thunderbolt pierced through the dark clouds like a long sword and illuminated the entire world. The dark sky was shrouded by the rolling dark clouds, and the turbulent sea reflected the strong light. Then, a loud bang was heard. It was so loud that even the ground could feel the strong tremors. Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth and felt that he couldn't hear anything. However, his eyes were still wide open as he looked at the place where the thunderbolt struck. It was the clouds that shrouded the East Holy Land no matter how strong the wind was. In the instant that the huge thunderbolt disappeared into the clouds, the world returned to darkness. However, Yu Qianzhou could faintly see that the moment the light disappeared, the unmoving clouds seemed to move. Chapter 708. Bang! With a loud explosion, another huge thunderbolt appeared in the dark clouds. The direction it struck was exactly where the previous thunderbolt struck. With the help of the strong light, one could see that the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land, which could not be blown away by the wind, were slowly surging. Before the dazzling light disappeared, another shocking thunderbolt struck at the same location. Once the three thunderbolts appeared, it was as if a fuse had been lit. In an instant, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. Densely packed green electric snakes flashed in the dark clouds and interweaved like a net. The scene was extremely shocking. Under the lightning, Xian Island was completely lit up. The surrounding sea surface was filled with billowing green light. At this moment, the dark clouds in the sky shouldn't be called dark clouds, but lightning clouds. They were formed by dense lightning. Countless densely packed lightning bolts shot towards the sky above Xian Island and converged into a gigantic thunderbolt. Bang! Once again, the target was the same as the previous three lightning bolts. Yu Qianzhou's eyes widened as he personally saw the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land rotating slowly. Suddenly, as if the speed of rotation was too slow, earth-shattering explosions resounded. Countless lightning snakes gathered to form huge thunderbolts. They crazily struck out one after another. More and more of them appeared, and the frequency of the strikes also became denser and denser. This scene reminded Yu Qianzhou of a dozen heavy machine guns bombarding the same target. Other than the continuous loud explosion, nothing else could be heard. The dark clouds had turned into a world of thunder and lightning. The lightning shot out wildly, and everywhere was covered in a vast expanse of green. The four people on the main peak of Xian Island could clearly feel the entire mountain beneath their feet shaking. Rocks of all sizes on the mountain were rolling down the mountain. This was because they were not ordinary people. Their cultivation was not weak and they could circulate their energy to resist the tremors. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died from the tremors. Yu Qianqiu, whose cultivation was inferior, had already used his fingers to block his ears. Otherwise, he would not have been able to bear it. Even so, he still felt a little dizzy. He felt that his surroundings were filled with electromagnetism. All the hair on his body stood on end, as if there was an electric current flowing on the surface of his body. Although the Huaxia cultivators who were dozens of kilometers away were already very far away, they could still imagine the shocking scene in that place. All of them were dumbfounded as they looked at the shocking scene in the distance. Suddenly, someone noticed that hundreds of figures were flying towards the place where the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The lords of the various countries had already kept their flying artifacts and were flying over quickly. They gathered at a spot several miles away from Xian Island and hovered in the air. Looking at the might of the world before them, even though this was not the first time they had seen it, they still felt their hearts tremble. In that instant, they felt how insignificant they were. In the face of the might of heaven and earth, no matter how high his cultivation was, he was nothing more than an ant in this world. The continuous thunderbolts continued for nearly an hour before they finally calmed down. The wind between the sea and the sky was getting fiercer and fiercer. That was because a huge whirlpool had formed in the sky where the lightning struck. It produced a powerful suction force and stirred up the surrounding airflow. Bai Changchun, Grandmaster Nan Ming, and Nongzhu were like nails nailed to the mountain peak, not moving an inch. On the other hand, Yu Qianqiu was dumbfounded. He could not withstand it with his cultivation. He lost his center of gravity due to the strong wind. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he felt like he was about to float away with the wind. Nongzhu looked at his bewildered expression and laughed sinisterly. At this moment, Grandmaster Nan Ming's bear-like palm pressed on Yu Qianqiu's shoulder. A warm current flowed into Yu Qianqiu's body, and he immediately stood firmly on the spot like a stake. Yu Qianqiu finally relaxed and could enjoy the scenery with peace of mind. The dense lightning in the dark clouds gradually died out, and the last ray of light between the heavens and the earth disappeared as well. Once again, they were plunged into complete darkness. All that was left in the surroundings was the strong wind blowing ceaselessly. However, Yu Qianqiu could clearly feel that the strong wind was slowly rising into the sky. The sound of the surging waves seemed to be gradually calming down, and it was no longer as impatient. At this moment, Grandmaster Nan Ming withdrew his palm from Yu Qianqiu's shoulder. Yu Qianqiu stretched out his hand to feel up and down in the darkness. The wind was indeed much weaker, and the whistling sound reached the sky. Ouch! Yu Qianqiu cried out in pain. In the darkness, Nongzhu said angrily, "Yu Qianqiu, is there something wrong with you? How dare you touch my butt?" Yu Qianqiu hurriedly explained, "Don't misunderstand. I don't have that kind of hobby. I really didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind, and I accidentally touched you." Amidst their whispers, Grandmaster Nan Ming's laughter could be heard. "Wah! Old man Nan Ming, you!" Nongzhu screamed as her butt was pinched by someone. "Don't misunderstand. I didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind," Grandmaster Nan Ming snickered. Amidst the crackling noises, Nan Ming ancestors' blood-curdling screams could be heard. Nongzhu roared in anger, "King, feel the wind. Is it something you pinched with your hands?" Yu Qianqiu quickly moved away to avoid being affected by the two people. Not long after, a bright white light appeared in the surrounding horizon, and it was expanding rapidly. The dark clouds in the sky were shrinking rapidly. In less than an hour, light once again shone on this part of the sea. The eastern sacred land was originally shrouded in white fog, but now, a black whirlpool appeared in the sky. It sucked in the dark clouds that were as thick as ink, like a tornado pillar. The area of the dark clouds in the sky became smaller and smaller, and they were gradually swallowed by the black whirlpool. After a while, the last piece of dark cloud was sucked in by the whirlpool. The sky returned to being bright and sunny, and the blue waves of the sea rippled normally. The only difference was that above the eastern sacred land, in the whirlpool that was dozens of meters wide, a dense electric web suddenly appeared. It was like a huge beast opening its fangs to devour. After more than 300 years, the eastern sacred land has finally opened. Grandmaster Nanming let out a long sigh. Yu Qianshou turned his head and saw that his red hair and red beard had become messy as if someone had pulled them. Needless to say, it was definitely done by the furious Nongzhu. There were also many footprints on the buttocks of his red underpants. He reckoned that Nongzhu had something to do with them. Yu Qianshou didn't have the mood to pay too much attention to this. He looked at the whirlpool that gathered lightning and said in a daze, "This whirlpool is the entrance to the eastern sacred land?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded and said, "That's right. An entrance with no exit can only be maintained for a period of time. After 6 hours, it will automatically close and return to normal. If you want to enter again, you have to wait for the next opening in 300 years. The three of them looked at Bai Changchun at the same time. They saw Bai Changchun, who was standing with his hands behind his back, slowly turn around and stare behind him expressionlessly. The three of them followed his gaze and immediately noticed the group of people several miles away. The cultivation of that group of people wasn't weak. They immediately noticed Bai Changchun looking at them, and they looked at each other guiltily. Pei Fong's fat face twitched, and he smiled awkwardly at the crowd. Bai Changchun is leaving, let's send him off. With him in the lead, more than 100 people quickly flew over. The space at the top of the main peak was limited, and it couldn't accommodate more than 100 people. Furthermore, they didn't dare to stand together with Bai Changchun, so they all landed at the foot of the main peak. All of them sneaked glances at Bai Changchun, but to their surprise, they realized that Yu Qianshou was actually standing next to Bai Changchun. Grandmaster Nanming and Nongzhu were still acceptable, but that guy had such a big responsibility. What right did he have to stand next to Bai Changchun? Yu Qianshou stared at the group of soul-forming experts below him, and he felt very pleased. The feeling of looking down at a group of soul-forming experts from a high position was very, very satisfying. Pei Fong cupped his broken palm and said with a smile, "We learned that Brother Bai is leaving, so we specially came to send you off. Nanming, Nongzhu, you're here too. Yo! Brother Yu Qianshou is here too." Bai Changchun's sharp gaze swept across the people below, and finally, he stared at Pei Fong. He said lightly, "Pei Fong, are you the leader?" His indifferent words immediately scared Pei Fong so much that cold sweat broke out on his back. There were too many meanings in his words, and it was easy for people to misunderstand. Pei Fong's expression changed, and he immediately waved his hand and said, "No, no, we all agreed to come together. We thought that you were going to leave, so we all thought that we should send you off." As he said this, he turned around and asked the people behind him, "What do you think, everyone?" "Yes. Yes. Yes. We should send him off." The group of people replied meekly. None of them dared to raise their voices. Looking at the situation, the people standing at the front couldn't wait to shrink back even more. Now this was majestic. He could scare a group of soul-forming experts like grandchildren. Yu Qianshou's eyes lit up, and he looked at Bai Changchun with great admiration. Nongzhu and ancestor of Nanming looked at each other and shook their heads slightly. Bai Changchun's despotic power had suppressed everyone for too long, causing everyone to be afraid to the bone. One wrong look from him could immediately make a group of people tremble with fear. "In that case, should I thank you for your kindness?" Bai Changchun asked lightly. "No need, no need." Pei Fong squeezed out a smile on his fat face, and he waved his hand repeatedly and said, "We've all been in the cultivation world for so many years. It's only right for us to send you off, it's only right." At this moment, Bai Changchun suddenly looked far away. Everyone followed his gaze and saw a group of densely packed flying artifacts carrying a group of people flying over quickly. It was the group of people from the cultivation world of Huaxia. Led by Feng Xiangtian of Fuxian Island, hundreds of sect masters gathered. The closer they got to Xian Island, the faster their hearts beat. The legendary number 1 expert in the world should be in front, but no one had seen him before. When everyone got closer and saw the group of lords on the main peak, they couldn't help but look at the 4 people standing on the peak. To be able to make the lords of the soul-forming realms submit to them, they were naturally extraordinary. Among them, there must be the legendary number 1 expert in the world. Chapter 709. Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. There were many familiar faces among this group of people from Huaxia. He muttered to himself, "Why are these people here to join in the fun? This isn't a place for you to join in the fun. You can't afford to play." A group of flying artifacts stopped tens of meters away. The feudal lord standing on the second peak stared at these people coldly. The Huaxia cultivators sized up the 4 people standing on the peak anxiously. Many of them were stunned because one of them was very eye-catching. It was hard not to recognize him. The group of people was speechless. Why is Yu Qianqiu here? Moreover, he was standing high above the feudal lords. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were puzzled when they saw Yu Qianqiu here. Although the Huaxia cultivators didn't recognize Bai Changchun, the temperament of the 4 people was obvious. There was no need to mention Yu Qianqiu. The red-haired, red-bearded, bare-chested old man and the handsome middle-aged man didn't match the image of the world's number 1 expert in the legends. Only the green-robed old man had a thin face, and his eyes were filled with a supercilious indifference. He stood there motionlessly, yet he gave off a feeling that he was one with the world. He was probably the number 1 person in the world in the legends. Yu Qianqiu stared coldly at Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. He sneered and said, "Sect leader Feng, it's been a long time. I wonder why you're here." Feng Xiangtian was a sect leader, so he wasn't someone who didn't know the severity of the situation. Since Yu Qianqiu could stand here and speak first, he was already not someone Fuxian Island could afford to offend. He didn't care about his reputation anymore. He had to drink the bitter wine he brewed himself. He squeezed out a smile and cupped his hands. Our Huaxia cultivators have been protected by Elder Bai for many years. Today, we heard that Elder Bai is going to the East Holy Land. Huaxia's 373 sect leaders came to send you off as a token of our goodwill. May I know which one is Elder Bai? Please allow us to thank you. The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Even Yu Qianqiu didn't expect nearly 400 sect leaders to come from Huaxia's cultivation world. Didn't that mean all the sects were here? What were these people trying to do? They were here to see Bai Changchun, so Yu Qianqiu couldn't say anything. However, Bai Changchun didn't say anything either. It was as if he hadn't heard anything. At that moment, a flying artifact flew out from the Huaxia's formation, attracting everyone's attention. Yu Qianqiu took a casual glance and immediately recognized them. They were people from the 4 great clans. The 4 clan leaders stood at the front of the flying artifact. The rest of the Chinese cultivation world didn't know Bai Changchun, but the 4 great families' patriarchs had seen him before. Now that the patriarch was in front of them, they naturally had to come out and greet him. Bai Shouji, a descendant of the Bai family, greets the ancestor. Bai Shouji knelt on the flying magic tool in front of everyone with an emotional expression. The 2 Bai clan elders behind him also lifted their long robes in excitement and knelt down to pay their respects. The ancestor's name shook the world. As a descendant, he felt honored. Wu clan, Jing clan, and Tan clan's juniors greet ancestor. The 3 clan leaders and 2 clan elders each knelt. Putting aside the other 3 clans, just Bai Shouji's words alone had shocked everyone. His surname was Bai, and he called Bai Changchun old ancestor. Didn't that mean? Other than Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu, who were in the know, everyone else, including Nanming old ancestor, were shocked speechless. Especially those from Huaxia's cultivation world, they were all dumbfounded. At that moment, someone vaguely remembered that the 4 clans once had a very powerful figure. However, it was just a rumor without any proof. They didn't expect it to be the world's #1 expert, Bai Changchun. Everyone's gaze moved back and forth between the 4 clans and Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 clans and sighed. What are you doing here? There was a rare softness in his tone. No matter how ruthless he was, the 4 families in front of him were still his descendants. Now that he was leaving, his future was uncertain. Perhaps after this farewell, he would never have the chance to meet them again. Once Bai Changchun spoke, everyone's guess about the 4 clans became certain. They were really Bai Changchun's descendants. Oh my! He was Bai Changchun. The Huaxia cultivators first looked at Bai Changchun with great respect. Then, they looked at the 4 clans with complicated expressions. All of them cursed in their hearts. The 4 clans hid themselves too well. They had such a powerful backer, but they never revealed it. No wonder the 4 clans always advanced and retreated together. They were a family that wore the same pants. What's more, the sects that had conflicts with the 4 clans and had evil designs on the 4 clans were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Bai Shoji, who was kowtowing, stood up and said excitedly, Ancestor, I heard that you are going to the Holy East Land. How can the descendants of the 4 clans not come to send you off? Otherwise, we will be scolded by our descendants as unfilial descendants. Please don't be angry, Ancestor. Please forgive us. Forget it. Bai Changchun raised his hand at the 4 clans and said, Get up. Thank you, Ancestor. The 4 clans kowtowed and stood up. They looked at Bai Changchun excitedly. Apart from the 4 clan heads, the other 6 clan elders had never seen Bai Changchun before. Originally, some of the 6 elders had doubts about the 4 clan heads going to the Demon Ghost region to see Bai Changchun. Now, all their doubts were gone. All that was left was excitement. Ancestors might shook the world. He was truly the world's #1 expert. This glory was enough for future generations to praise and be proud of. Yu Qianqiu. Bai Changchun suddenly called out. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thought that Bai Changchun wouldn't reveal their master-disciple relationship in front of everyone. However, since he had called out to him in front of everyone, it was time to announce their relationship. He immediately bowed and said, Disciple is here. Ah. He is. The surroundings immediately became chaotic, and a wave of exclamations rang out. Everyone was stunned and looked at Bai Changchun and Yu Qianqiu in disbelief. These two are actually master and disciple? Oh my God. Many of the feudal lords were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Almost everyone had a part in hunting down Yu Qianqiu. Fortunately, that kid was lucky. If something really happened to him, it would be a big joke. Who was Bai Changchun? There was no need to doubt what would happen to him. Many people cursed Yu Qianqiu's 18 generations of ancestors in their hearts. He was forced to such a point, yet he still didn't reveal his backer. Even if he wanted to die, he didn't need to drag them down with him. Thank goodness, thank goodness, thank goodness this brat is still alive and kicking. The expressions of the soul formation stage feudal lords were rich and colorful. Now many people finally understood. No wonder this kid was always hanging out with Nongzhu. No wonder when Lanfeng began to support this kid after returning from the demon domain. No wonder this kid dared to run amok in the cultivation world and was not afraid of anything. It turned out that he had Bai Changchun behind him. No wonder he was qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun now. The people of the Huaxia cultivation world all stared at Yu Qianqiu with complicated and fiery expressions. His background was too powerful. When this truth was announced, it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone. All of them were stunned. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 major families and said slowly, If the 4 families live their lives according to their own will, if they encounter any trouble in the future, they don't seek to live forever and don't seek to be illustrious. As long as it's within your ability, there's no need to force it. You can be a little more considerate. This can also be considered as fulfilling the relationship between me and the 4 families. Yu Qianqiu didn't give any guarantee. He just cupped his hands and said indifferently, Rest assured, Master. This disciple will remember. Bai Changchun nodded slightly and waved to the 4 families. There's nothing for you to do here. Go back quickly and live your own lives. The four families looked at each other. They were here to send off their ancestor. Now that the ancestor hadn't been sent off, how could they go back? Seeing that the four wanted to say something, Yu Qianqiu glanced at the Soul Formation stage feudal lords and said sternly, "For family heads, don't say anything more. Listen to Master's arrangements and go back immediately. Don't make Master angry. Otherwise, you will all be unfilial descendants." At this point, the four families didn't dare to disobey their ancestor. They all knelt again and said, "Yes, ancestor. Farewell, ancestor." Then, they stood up and flew around the various sects on their flying Dharma artifact. Under the envious gazes of the sects, they quickly flew back to Huaxia. At this time, there was a commotion among the sects in Huaxia. They must have secretly sent the same message. They all bowed to Bai Changchun and said, "Greetings, Senior Bai." Yu Qianqiu looked at these people speechlessly. He didn't know what they wanted to do. But at this time, he was suddenly stunned. Among the people bowing, there were four women in white standing on a flying Dharma artifact behind the people from Fuxian Island. Two of them bowed and the other two stood straight. They didn't bow. They were very eye-catching in the crowd. Yu Qianqiu knew the person in the lead. It was the Moon Clan master, Jade Flower Fairy. Jade Flower Fairy was biting her lips and staring at them. Hua Rui, who was standing beside her, was also looking at them in astonishment. Yu Qianqiu guessed what they were looking at. He tilted his head and was slightly stunned. Suddenly, he understood everything. They were looking at none other than the elegant island master of the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest, the famous Mr. Nongzhu. Nongzhu also looked at Jade Flower Fairy with a dumbfounded expression. He probably didn't expect to meet Jade Flower Fairy on Xianxian Island. The man and the woman finally met each other. Yu Qianqiu immediately lowered his head and laughed. He wanted to find a chance to drag Jade Flower Fairy to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest to discuss Nongzhu. Now it seemed that there was no need at all. He didn't need to think about being the bad guy anymore. He just needed to watch the show. Seeing him laughing like this, Bai Changchun and the Nanming Patriarch looked at him with questioning eyes. When Yu Qianqiu noticed their eyes, he immediately felt that he had lost his composure. He coughed and straightened his expression. First, he sent a voice transmission to Bai Changchun, "Master, the beautiful woman standing at the front is Zi's mother." Then, as if wanting the world to be in chaos, he sent a telepathic message to Grandmaster Nanming, "Senior Nanming, the beautiful woman standing at the very front is an old flame that Senior Nongzhu secretly dumped. We haven't seen her for many years. Don't tell others that I said it." Chapter 710. Bai Changchun was already looking at Ziyi's mother. Ancestor Nanming asked in disbelief, "Nongzhu's lover? Really? You're not lying to me, are you?" "Senior Nanming, what are you talking about? I'm famous for my credibility. Everyone in the cultivation world knows that. I've never lied in my life. That woman is the leader of the Moon Clan of Huaxia. People call her Fairy Qianhua. If you don't believe me, you can ask Senior Nongzhu. I promise I'm telling the truth. But don't tell him I said it, or he'll fight me to the death." "Okay. I know. Fairy Qianhua, the leader of the Moon Clan of Huaxia?" Ancestor Nanming tilted his head and looked at Nongzhu. Seeing her dumbfounded look, he immediately believed Yu Qianqiu's words. He rolled his eyes and shouted at Fairy Qianhua, "Is that the leader of the Moon Clan, Fairy Qianhua?" His words shocked everyone. Everyone looked at Ancestor Nanming, wondering how he knew Fairy Qianhua. Because of Yunnan Tian and Hua Zongming's mistakes, the feudal lords of the various countries immediately let their imaginations run wild. Could it be that the Nanming old ancestor had also taken a fancy to this woman? Fairy Qianhua turned a deaf ear and kept biting her lips while looking at Nongzhu. On the other hand, Nongzhu was almost the same. Hua Rui came to her senses. She quickly pulled Fairy Qianghua and repeated what ancestor Nanming said. People who could stand next to Bai Changchun were not ordinary people. They couldn't afford to offend them at all. However, her brother-in-law, the handsome and peerless brother-in-law, the brother-in-law named Xiao Yao, the brother-in-law who suddenly disappeared with a baby, she would never mistake him for someone else. That mortal from the mortal world was now standing at the peak of the cultivation world with Bai Changchun. Who exactly was he? Fairy Qianghua came back to her senses. She looked a bit sad. She turned and bowed slightly to ancestor Nanming. I'm the leader of the Moon Clan, Qianghua. How do you know me? Forgive this junior's poor eyesight, but I don't think I've seen senior before. Ancestor Nanming, who had been beaten up by Nong Zhu in the dark because he had pinched Nong Zhu's butt, was wearing a pair of red underpants. With his hands on his hips, he laughed out loud and said, I am the island master of Xian Island. In the cultivation world, people call me Ancestor Nanming. His arrogant and proud laughter echoed in all directions. All the sects in Huaxia were astonished. It turned out that this was Nanming Ancestor, one of the 4 great men who was equally famous as Bai Changchun in the cultivation world. Qianghua Fairy was also slightly surprised. She bowed again and said, Senior Nanming, it's my honor to meet you. Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongzhu and saw that she was glaring at him. He was too lazy to pay attention to her and continued to laugh. I've long heard of Fairy Qianghua's great name. I would like to do my best as a host and invite you to stay on Xian Island as a guest. Would you be willing to give me face? Qianghua Fairy glanced at Nongzhu and replied solemnly, How can I reject your invitation? Good, good, good. Ancestor Nanming laughed and said, Good, 3 times in a row. Then he stopped talking. Almost everyone present could not wrap their heads around this and did not know what was going on. Bai Changchun, on the other hand, glanced at Yu Qianqiu who was standing obediently on the side. Nongzhu frowned and seemed to have figured something out in an instant. She stared angrily at Yu Qianqiu who looked like an honest man and asked him telepathically, Yu Qianqiu, was it you who told Nanming Ancestor Nanming? Yu Qianqiu immediately denied it with telepathy, no. Bullsh *t. Out of the 4 of us, only you and I have seen her. How could Nanming Ancestor Nanming know that she is Qianghua Fairy, the head of the Moon Clan? Who else could it be if it wasn't you? Don't accuse a good person here. I was just wondering how Senior Nanming knew her. Yu Qianqiu replied, Do you think it's possible that old Ancestor Nanming really admired Fairy Viburnum's name for a long time? In addition to Fairy Viburnum's outstanding appearance, he guessed it immediately. Oh my god. Could it be that Senior Nanming has taken a fancy to Fairy Jasper Flower? Oh my god. Then you guys are. Nongzhu's teeth hurt when she heard this. The muscles on her face twitched and a trace of panic flashed across her face. She turned to look at the smiling Ancestor Nanming and found that he was staring at Qianghua Fairy with an expression that he had never shown to any woman before. The more she looked, the more she looked like Qianghua Fairy. It was really like what Yu Qianqiu had said. At this moment, Bai Changchun slowly floated up into the sky and turned to face the black whirlpool and the white fog that enveloped the East Holy Land. His body gradually rose into the sky. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on the rising figure in the green robe. They all knew what he was going to do. The blue sky, the blue sea, the East Pole opened. Bai Changchun slowly rose into the sky, ready to take the risk alone. Although the figure in the green robe was thin, it gave people a sense of heroism at this moment. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming's expressions instantly became solemn, and they were vaguely worried. The lords of various countries looked a little expectant, as if they could not wait for Bai Changchun to leave quickly. As for Yu Qianqiu, he seemed to be a little indifferent. He only came here to see how his master entered the legendary East Holy Land. If it was not for the long talk that lasted through the night, Yu Qianqiu would probably also be worried about Bai Changchun. However, after the long talk that lasted through the night, he knew the details of Bai Changchun's cultivation, and basically, he was not worried anymore. Moreover, just in case. He even revealed the secret of the golden bead teleportation and even gave Bai Changchun a bunch of small silver beads so that if Bai Changchun encountered any danger that he could not solve, he could immediately contact him and he would immediately move Bai Changchun out. All the Huaxia cultivators looked at each other, and they all looked at Feng Xiangtian expectantly. Feng Xiangtian had no choice but to bite the bullet and shout loudly, "Senior Bai, the Huaxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, senior." Bai Changchun turned a deaf ear to him and continued to rise. He was already close to the center of the black vortex. Swoosh. The lords of various countries stared at Feng Xiangtian like sharp blades, and they could not wait to poke a bloody hole in his body. What does this guy want to do? Does he want to summon Bai Changchun back to deal with us? Feng Xiangtian immediately felt chills all over his body when he was stared at by these people. However, the more he was at this juncture, the more he wanted to save himself. Just as he was about to call for help again, he saw a transparent light shield suddenly appear around Bai Changchun's body. Obviously, Bai Changchun was ready to go in. "Senior Bai, the Huaxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, senior." Feng Xiangtian shouted loudly again and again. However, Bai Changchun did not care about him at all. Even the lords of various countries could not be bothered to reason with him for the time being. All their attention was focused on the sky, and they could not take their eyes off him. Even with Bai Changchun's cultivation, he had released protective aura to protect his body. It could be seen that he did not dare to underestimate the situation and had made thorough preparations. In the rapidly spinning black vortex, dense electric snakes shuttled back and forth like a net, like a monster opening its huge mouth to devour, staring at the green-robed figure floating in the air. Because of the sudden appearance of Bai Changchun in the wind gap, the originally whirling black vortex sucker suddenly made the invisible wind pillar that had no resistance become chaotic, almost turning into tangible wind blades, whipping at Bai Changchun's protective aura chi. Woo-woo. Swoosh swoosh. A shrill and strange sound appeared in the sky, like a giant beast opening its fangs with lightning and roaring. Suddenly, Bai Changchun's figure shot toward the center of the black vortex like a green meteor. Everyone's eyes could hardly react, and they saw the figure crash into the center of the black vortex in the blink of an eye. In an instant, rapid flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder appeared in the black vortex, as if the intruding figure had created a wave that resembled lightning. Then, the movement gradually calmed down, and Bai Changchun's figure completely disappeared in the black vortex. Everyone present held their breaths with rapt attention. No one even breathed loudly. Although they saw Bai Changchun enter, they still stared fixedly at the black whirlpool with lightning bolts swirling around it. After a long time, it was estimated that the 6 hours of the opening of the Holy East Land was over. The black vortex embedded in the white fog gradually shrank, and the lightning in it shone with green light. Finally, along with the shrinking black vortex, it disappeared in the vast white fog. In an instant, the world returned to normal, and the rapid spinning sound disappeared. There was only the sound of the sea breeze blowing and the sound of the waves hitting the rocky shore. Everyone came back to their senses and looked at each other, especially the lords of the various countries. All of them let out a sigh of relief and looked at each other with an irrepressible smile of excitement. The number one expert in the world who had suppressed everyone for many years was finally gone. The terrifying expert who made everyone tremble with fear was finally gone. The god of death finally went to the Holy East Land where he would never return. The stone that had been pressing on everyone's hearts for many years was finally removed. The haze that had shrouded their hearts for many years was finally blown away. Breathing in the free sea breeze of Xian Island, they could feel a trace of sweetness. Pei Fang's eyes flickered as he looked around. After making eye contact with Qi Zhoujuan and Ouyangda, Pei Fang couldn't help but let out an arrogant "ga" laughter towards the sky. The two of them also laughed heartily. Their laughter echoed in the sky above Xian Island. The time that belonged to them had finally arrived. Bai Changchun was gone, and Yin Baikong was dead. As long as the three of them united, Bing Qingzi and Hu Changshou would not be difficult to deal with. As long as they took care of these two. Although Wen Lanfeng's cultivation was high, he was actually the easiest person to deal with. As long as they spent some time and played some tricks, they would not have to worry about not being able to deal with him. As long as they took care of these 3 people, from now on, no one in this world would be able to restrict their freedom. How could they not be happy when they thought of the day where they could freely roam the world after cultivating for a lifetime? The people of the Chinese cultivation world already felt that the situation was not good. They all regretted coming here. Now, it was tantamount to sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. All of them started to beat a retreat in their hearts and slowly retreated, hoping that the lords of the various countries would not bother with them now that they were in high spirits. This person could always come up with childish ideas to comfort me when he was on the verge of despair. Actually, most of the spirit-severing realm lords were indeed in high spirits and did not have any thoughts of taking care of them now. However, when Yan Ji glanced over, his killing intent instantly rose. He immediately shouted angrily, "All of you, stop!" His proud disciple had died in the Chinese cultivation world. He had long since lost his good impression of the Chinese cultivators. How could he let them go now? Chapter 711. Before he finished speaking, Yan Ji's figure had already disappeared from where he was and blocked the retreat of the Huaxia sections. He floated in the air with a ferocious expression and sneered, "Want to run? Since you've delivered yourselves to me, why don't you all stay here?" The small sects that had been standing at the back immediately became the first to retreat. Some of them even almost bumped into Yan Ji, who had suddenly appeared. They were so frightened that they quickly retreated with their flying celestial devices. The Huaxia sects were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They were all in a mess, huddling together and taking unnecessary precautions. Seeing this scene, many of the feudal lords burst into laughter. Yan Ji was obviously very proud of his ability to scare the Huaxia sects like this. He pointed at the sect that almost bumped into him and said arrogantly, "How dare you talk back to me? All of you kneel and kowtow to apologize, or I'll start with you first." There were only 3 people standing on the small flying celestial device. Hearing this, all of them were extremely indignant. However, they were no match for Yan Ji, who was a legendary soul formation expert. They might not be able to escape today. Nongzhu and the great ancestor of Nanming silently looked at the wild lords of the various countries and didn't say anything. These people had been suppressed by Bai Changchun for many years. Now that Bai Changchun had left, they would probably vent their pent-up anger on these Huaxia cultivators. It was understandable. But then again, did it matter to them whether the Huaxia cultivators lived or died? For those who struggled in the cultivation world, life and death were all decided in an instant. Life and death were not important. This was actually a part of cultivation. It all depended on whether one could break through safely. However, Yu Qianqiu's expression was not so good. He had long known that these Huaxia cultivators would definitely be unlucky to break through at this time. Otherwise, Bai Changchun wouldn't have let the 4 clans leave first. There were some things that Bai Changchun was well aware of. The world was full of misfortunes. Once he left, it would be useless to worry about what would happen after him. For the sake of his relationship with the 4 great families, he had stayed for a while and bought time for the 4 great families to leave. He had already done his best. Yu Qianqiu was well aware of this, which was why he helped Bai Changchun urge the 4 families to leave. Although he himself did not have a good impression of the people of the Chinese cultivation world, and after the long talk with Bai Changchun that night, his view of the situation was no longer limited to the Chinese cultivation world, but the whole world. If Yan Ji were to kill someone, he might weigh the pros and cons and turn a blind eye to it in order to protect himself. However, Yan Ji actually made a Chinese cultivator kneel and accept the humiliation. After all, he was born in the Huaxia cultivation world. It was difficult for him to watch the Huaxia cultivators being humiliated before their death. He had the urge to stand up for the Huaxia cultivators. This kind of impulsive nature was called bloodthirstiness. In his previous life, it was because of this kind of uncontrollable bloodthirstiness that ultimately led to the tragic end of his fate. Yu Qianqiu clenched his fists, but in the end, he still endured it. Nongzhu slightly tilted her head and glanced at him. At this moment, one of the three people on the flying celestial device that almost hit Yan Ji suddenly turned around and shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, I am Tu Yanfeng, an elder of the Huaxia Imperial Sword Sect. Do you remember what you said to me in the Cultivation Alliance?" Everyone stared at Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and the ancestor of Nanming also looked at him curiously, wondering what on earth Yu Qianqiu had said to him. Many Huaxia cultivators remembered that when Yu Qianqiu left the Cultivation Alliance, he had promised Tu Yanfeng that if the Imperial Sword Sect encountered any trouble, he could use the name of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng was a straightforward person. Otherwise, he would not have clashed with Yu Qianqiu even though he knew that he was no match for him. At this critical moment, he still spoke tactfully. Although he wanted to beg Yu Qianqiu, he only reminded Yu Qianqiu if he still remembered what he had said in the past. If Yu Qianqiu had forgotten, he would not say anything more. He just wanted to try with a glimmer of hope. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He stared at Tu Yanfeng's face and tried to recognize him. He immediately remembered what Tu Yanfeng said when he pretended to be generous and let him go. Although he clearly saw Yan Ji staring at him with a pair of cold eyes that were filled with killing intent, he still smiled. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Elder Tu from the Imperial Sword School. Since we're old acquaintances, please come and have a chat." Before Tu Yanfeng could reply, the head of the Imperial Sword Sect had already flown over on his flying celestial device and floated in front of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng glanced at the head slightly and looked a little embarrassed. At the head's greeting, the three of them jumped down, put away their flying celestial devices, and bowed to Ancestor Nanming, Nongzhu, and Yu Qianqiu. Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu just looked at them expressionlessly and had no intention of paying attention to them. Instead, Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Elder Tu, I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been?" Tu Yanfeng looked a little ashamed. He lowered his head and cupped his hands, not saying anything. Yu Qianqiu nodded with a smile. To be honest, this kind of person who was too ashamed was not suitable to live in the cultivation world, but he admired him. Hee. Yan Ji stared at them and sneered. He squinted his eyes and asked, "Yu Qianqiu, what do you mean? Do you want to protect them from me?" Yu Qianqiu's gaze slowly shifted from Tu Yanfeng to Yan Ji. He asked in a neutral tone, "From what you're saying, could it be that you want to kill them from my hands?" The meaning of his words could not be clearer. It was obvious that he wanted to protect the people of the Imperial Sword School. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming frowned at the same time. Among the feudal lords, many people were already laughing mockingly. They were laughing at Yu Qianqiu for overestimating himself. Yan Ji immediately threw his head back and laughed loudly. "You want to protect them? I haven't even settled the score of killing this old man's disciple, but you've already delivered yourself to me." Yu Qianqiu said disdainfully, "Old man, it's not that I'm looking down on you, but I'm standing right here. If you have the ability, come and try to touch me." Presumptuous. It's time to settle the score between us. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong rose into the air and stood at the same level as the people on the mountain peak. Although their words were directed at Yu Qianqiu, they were also staring at Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming. Their meaning was clear. They wanted to suppress Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu, preventing them from interfering with Yan Ji's killing of Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming's faces darkened. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. They were ready to protect Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu, in particular, took out the bamboo flute from her waist and held it in her hand. Her whole body was bursting with fighting spirit. She could not tolerate someone bullying Bai Changchun's disciple as soon as he left. Seeing that someone was cooperating with him, Yan Ji was full of smiles. He shook his head and said, "Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu. I wanted to spare your life today for the sake of Bai Changchun. Who knew that you would come to me to court death? Bai Changchun is not here anymore. Who do you think you are? Give me your life." With a loud shout, Yan Ji turned into a shadow and directly rushed over. He was as fast as lightning, carrying the momentum of wind and thunder. He arrived in the blink of an eye. Almost at the same time, Nongzhu shouted angrily, "Nan Ming, protect Yu Qianqiu." He had already rushed out. With a loud bang, the two phantoms collided and directly collided together. Obviously, Nongzhu's cultivation was higher. Yan Ji let out a muffled groan, and his body was directly knocked back. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong looked at each other and nodded solemnly. They both shot toward Nongzhu in the air. In an instant, Nongzhu split into two figures in the air and faced the two of them respectively. Bang, bang. A strong bang set off a raging airwave, forcing the Huaxia cultivators to almost lose their balance on their flying celestial devices. All of them stared at the duel between the two masters of the soul formation stage in horror. They were too powerful. The aftershock of the fight was not something they could bear. Holding a golden net in his hand, Nan Ming Ancestor moved to the side of Yu Qianqiu and watched the fight in the sky with a red face. Yu Qianqiu's eyes were like an owl. Two balls of black flames were jumping rapidly in his eyes, and the killing intent on his face could not be suppressed. The three people who were fighting fiercely turned into two messy shadows. Bang, bang, bang. They directly flew up into the sky. The lords of the various countries watched the fight with interest. It seemed that they wanted to see who would be the unlucky one. Pei Fong, in particular, had a beaming smile on his face. Yan Ji, who was knocked away, stopped retreating. He looked down at his chest, where a very conspicuous footprint was left. He raised his hand angrily and wiped off a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. A shiny black whip appeared in his hand. He stared at the sky and shouted angrily, "Nongzhu, today is the day you die." His figure shot up into the sky. "Just you?" Nongzhu snorted disdainfully. Suddenly, hundreds of Nongzhu appeared in the sky and surrounded Hua Zongming, Pu Taidong, and Yan Ji. The four people fought fiercely and crazily in the sky. The shadows intertwined in the sky, fighting back and forth. Loud noises were heard constantly, and the airwaves covered the sky and the earth. Those whose cultivation was below the deification stage could not tell who the four people were. In the angry rebuke, Nongzhu actually fought evenly against the three people. At this time, the three people in the sky were fighting against Nongzhu, but it seemed that Nongzhu had surrounded the three of them. Others might not see the reason, but the lords of the deification stage from various countries looked at each other in dismay. They all seemed to find it hard to believe. Because they could see that Nongzhu was fighting against three people, and she actually had the upper hand. Many people could not associate the previous Nongzhu, who did not do proper work, with the current Nongzhu who was fierce and fierce. It was really unexpected. The four people in the fierce battle were all at the middle stage of deification, but Nongzhu was not at a disadvantage against three people. Pei Fong squinted at the sky and said, "Nongzhu's transfiguration transposition skill is really worthy of its reputation. Coupled with her good cultivation, I'm afraid Hua Zongming and the other two people can't take advantage of her. It seems that Nongzhu is not far from breaking through the final stage of deification." When he said the last sentence, there was a hint of gloominess in his tone. Qi Zhoujuan said expressionlessly, "It's a pity that Mu Sang, Miao Hanyuan, and Xu Xin are not here. Otherwise, we can see if Nongzhu can fight against 6 people with her transfiguration transposition skill." Pei Fong chuckled and said, "Mu Sang and Miao Hanyuan will naturally help when they are here. However, Xu Xin seems to be in the same boat as Nongzhu. I don't know who will help who." His words immediately made the lords of various countries laugh. Chapter 712. The lords of various countries were in a good mood. They were all watching the show. But the Huaxia cultivators were watching the fierce fight above them in horror. They didn't dare to leave or run away. They were all standing there restlessly. With tears in her eyes, Qianghua Fairy stared at the fierce fight in the sky. Her red lips moved and she murmured with a bitter smile, "Nongzhu. He is Mr. Nongzhu, the famous owner of the purple bamboo forest in the South Sea. Mr. Nongzhu is Xiaoyao, and Xiaoyao is Mr. Nongzhu. Why did you lie to me? You lied to me so miserably. Yanji's words, Nongju, today is the day you die, immediately made Xianghua Fairy, who had been paying attention to Nongju, understand everything. Hua Rui, who was beside her, stared at the sky in a daze, her eyes shining with a strange light. She had never expected that her brother-in-law, who had suddenly disappeared, was such a powerful figure. He was also a famous figure in the cultivation world. His cultivation was too strong. It was said that he was a close friend of the most powerful cultivator in the world. My God! What on earth did my sister miss? Bang! A heavy sound came from high up in the sky. A figure smashed into the sea like a meteor, creating a huge splash. Before the waves had completely returned, the falling figure shot out from the ocean once again. With an angry roar, it said, "Kill him together." It was Yan Ji's voice. It seemed like he had suffered a loss again. As soon as he finished speaking, two beams of sword light appeared in the sky. They shone with each other and strangled Nongju's hundreds of phantoms crazily. Yan Ji, who had rushed up to the sky, waved the long whip in his hand completely. In an instant, the dark and gloomy whip shadows shot out disorderly like arrows. After cooperating with Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong, who were moving freely in the sky, they immediately suppressed the over 100 shadows of Nongju to less than 50. It made people feel that Nongju was in a precarious situation. Qianghua Fairy was still immersed in the memories of the past with tears in her eyes, but Hua Rui was a little worried by the movement above. Senior Nanming, go and help Senior Nongju. I'm fine here, Yu Qianqiu said in a low voice. Although he couldn't see clearly what was happening above, he could feel that Nongju's qi power was suppressed by Yan Ji and the other two. Old ancestor Nanming turned around to look at him, and he was instantly slightly shocked. He discovered that there were two balls of pitch-black flames leaping about in Yu Qianqiu's eyes as if they were about to jump out of his eye sockets uncontrollably. Moreover, he could faintly feel a bone-chilling coldness from Yu Qianqiu's body. That faintly discernible and terrifying aura made one's hair stand on end. Nongju will be fine for the time being. The old man still has some powerful skills that he hasn't used yet. Just as Patriarch Nanming finished speaking, the situation in the sky suddenly changed. Dozens of phantoms of Nongju, who had been suppressed by the three of them, suddenly emerged from the gaps of their encirclement. Dozens of phantoms danced in the air like flying fairies. The speed was getting faster and faster. The people watching from below only felt that their eyes were blurred. In an instant, each of Nongju's phantoms suddenly appeared as a clone. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of vivid and lifelike Nongju appeared in the air and surrounded the three of them again. Yan Ji and the other two were so fast that their figures could not be seen clearly. They attacked each of Nongju's phantoms crazily, but it seemed that every attack missed. They couldn't find out which one was the real Nongju. All of Nongju's phantoms suddenly stopped moving in the air. Some were standing, some were lying, some were leaning, some were tilting, and some were sitting with their legs crossed. Each of them was vivid and lifelike. They were handsome and elegant, fully displaying the peerless elegance of the most handsome man in the world. Every attack of Yan Ji and the other two easily pierced, slashed through each of the phantoms. They had no effect on the hundreds of phantoms that stopped in the air. Because they were all phantoms, physical attacks had no effect on them. Just when the three of them had attacked every phantom without any effect, the hundreds of phantoms stared at the three of them with smiles on their faces. Suddenly, they gently placed the flute to their lips in unison. Their 10 fingers moved up and down the flute holes in a carefree and unrestrained manner. A melodious flute sound reverberated endlessly between the heaven and the earth. Suddenly, the world became clear. It seemed that the people could no longer hear the whistling wind or the sound of the raging waves hitting the shore. They were in the sea area, but at this moment, they suddenly found themselves in a brilliant sea of flowers. The spring sun was beautiful, and the flowers were gorgeous. Many butterflies were flying in the sea of flowers, and many children were running happily in the sea of flowers. They seemed to have returned to their childhood, playing hide-and-seek and catching butterflies in the flowers. And they were one of the happy children. Just when they were gradually immersed in the happy times of their childhood, Pei Fong suddenly shouted angrily, what a powerful sound illusion. The phantoms in front of them suddenly shattered like porcelain vases that had fallen to the ground. All the beautiful scenes were shattered into pieces by Pei Fang's angry shout. In front of them was still Xian Island, and still this sea area. They were all illusions. Everyone was shocked. Only now did they remember that the fight was still going on. But why was there no sound of fighting? They hurriedly looked again, and just happened to see a body with its head smashed into pieces, falling powerlessly into the sea. In the air, Nongzhu and Hua Zongming stood face to face. However, Hua Zongming's head drooped down powerlessly. From his back, several bloody holes could be seen. A bamboo flute had pierced through his chest and drilled out from his heart. The hole at the end of the flute was bleeding profusely. Yan Ji's eyes were wide open, and he looked at Nongzhu in disbelief. He was swaying in the air, and the whip in his hand had long disappeared. One of his hands was covering his throat, and blood was flowing through the gaps between his fingers. His other hand, which was covering the left side of his chest, was also a patch of bright red. Yan Ji, I told you that you couldn't kill me, but you just didn't believe me. I didn't want to kill anyone, but you forced me to kill you. Why do you have to do this? Nongzhu looked at Yan Ji expressionlessly and said. Suddenly, a heavy palm landed on Hua Zongming's chest. The flute flew out from Hua Zongming's back and shot out in an arc. With a bang, it directly blew Yan Ji's head into pieces. The two corpses fell to the sea at the same time, splashing two waves. Nongzhu's flute drilled into the sea with a whoosh. It stirred in the sea for a while, and then bounced out with a bang, landing in Nongzhu's hand in the air. Nongzhu held it in her hand and looked at it, as if she was checking if it was clean. Then she nodded with satisfaction and teleported back to Nanming ancestor and Yu Qianqiu's side. Everyone looked at Nongzhu in shock. Whether it was the lords of the various countries or the Huaxia cultivators, they didn't expect that Nongzhu could kill 3 lords of the mid-divine transformation realm in the blink of an eye. 1 against 3. They were all at the mid-divine transformation realm, but he killed them all, and he was completely unharmed. What did this mean? The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Yan Ji, Hua Zongming, and Pu Taidong died just like that? This was a little hard for them to accept. They thought that Nongzhu would have a hard time in the future without Bai Changchun's support. Now it seemed that even without Bai Changchun's support, as long as he didn't offend the late divine transformation realm cultivators, he could still live freely without Bai Changchun's support. The skills he showed just now were enough to prove it. At least from the current situation, most of the lords might not be a match for Nongzhu. Jade Flower Fairy bit her lip. She didn't change at all because of Nongzhu's powerful skills. She still looked resentful with tears in her eyes. However, Hua Rui was different. Not only was she excited, but she couldn't hide the excitement in her eyes. She really wanted to run to Nongzhu, pull his arm, and call him brother-in-law, happily, just like in the past. Hua Rui's imagination ran wild. If brother-in-law could reconcile with sister, with brother-in-law's ability, who would dare to touch the Moon clan in the future? Nongzhu looked around coldly. The murderous aura around him was still there. He actually wasn't a bloodthirsty person. He just wanted to live a carefree life without competing with the world. He didn't want to offend anyone on purpose, nor did he want to have conflicts with anyone. He didn't want to kill anyone either. That was because he thought that he was born with no ambition. There was no need for him to waste his energy fighting with others. However, he wasn't a soft-hearted person either. When it was time to kill, he never hesitated. Today, even though he killed to protect Yu Qianqiu, it was also to avoid trouble for himself in the future. He deliberately killed in front of everyone to intimidate them. As soon as Bai Changchun left, these people showed their arrogance and were ready to make trouble. They actually targeted Bai Changchun's disciple. If he didn't intimidate them now, when would he? Once they attacked together, he wouldn't be able to block them even if he wanted to with his current level of cultivation. Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongzhu. He didn't seem surprised that Nongzhu could kill Yan Ji and the other 2. On the other hand, Yu Qianqiu was a little surprised. However, he wasn't surprised because Bai Changchun once told him not to underestimate Nongzhu. She wasn't as easy to bully as she looked. However, Yu Qianqiu kept looking at the flute in Nongzhu's hand. He felt a little nauseous. This was definitely not the first time this flute had killed someone. He thought of Nongzhu playing the flute next to his lips and then the scene of his opponent's intestines being pierced or brains being smashed. How could he stuff such a disgusting thing into his mouth? He really had to give it to him. That scene was like a bloodthirsty swordsman licking his lips after killing the enemy and tasting the blood on his sword. The atmosphere was a little quiet. Pei Fong stared at Nongzhu coldly. He looked left and right and transmitted his voice to Qi Zhujuan and Ouyangde. You've all seen it. Nongzhu is very likely to break through to the soul transformation final stage soon. Keeping him here won't do us any good. Why don't we take the opportunity now? What do you think? The two nodded slightly, obviously agreeing with Pei Fong's words. Pei Fong immediately chuckled and looked up at Nongzhu. Nongzhu, I really couldn't tell. What a good trick. Even I, Pei Fong, have to admire you. However, almost all the forces here had disciples who died in the hands of Yu Qianqiu. It's time to end it today. Nongzhu, I advise you to hand over Yu Qianqiu obediently. Don't put up any unnecessary resistance. Otherwise, hee. Don't blame us for being impolite. Chapter 713. The Lords of the Spirit Severing Realm quickly exchanged glances. None of them were fools. The meaning behind Pei Fong's words was self-evident. Ancestor Nanming quickly glanced at Pei Fong, Qi Zhujuan, and Ouyangde. Yu Qianqiu gnashed his teeth in hatred. Sure enough, none of them were good. They were all capricious villains. Damn fatty, don't fall into my hands. Otherwise, I'll make you feel good. Nongzhu also narrowed her eyes and sneered, Fatty Pei, when Bai Changchun was here, you still called Yu Qianqiu brother you. Why do you want to kill him in the blink of an eye? I haven't seen your brother do anything wrong to you. Could it be that you're deliberately looking for trouble and want to get rid of me as well? Pei Fong didn't mind being seen through by Nongzhu. Instead, he laughed and said, Nongzhu, if you insist on saying that, then what else can I say? He floated in the air and said with a laugh, then let me have a taste of brother Nongzhu's shifting position transposition skill. No problem, but before that, I have something to confirm with you. Nongzhu said. Pei Fong waved his hand and pretended to be generous, say it. As long as it's something that can be said, I'll tell you. What he said was the same as not saying it. Nongzhu snorted, I've asked you about this matter in the cornucopia before. That day, when Yu Qianqiu confronted the underworld messenger at the cornucopia, the underworld messenger suddenly found out about Yu Qianqiu's identity when he was leaving. Was it you who leaked it? Pei Fong's smile froze. He didn't expect that she would suddenly ask about this matter. He immediately became angry and shouted, Nongzhu, don't talk nonsense here. I've already said that it's none of my business. He was the one who did it, but he definitely wouldn't admit it. The reputation of betraying the enemy and colluding with the enemy was much worse than some bad reputation. Nongzhu sneered. She looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, do you know what to do now? Yu Qianqiu stared at Pei Fong coldly. He knew that Nongzhu would not say something like that without reason. It seemed that Pei Fong had done something behind her back then. It was no wonder that the green-browed guy had suddenly turned against him. Yu Qianqiu stared at Pei Fong coldly. But the strange thing was, why did Nongzhu tell him this now? However, Nongzhu's next words immediately made him understand. Nongzhu said, help me take care of Ze. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Nongzhu obviously knew that he was no match for Pei Fong, and she was entrusting him with her funeral. At this time, Nongzhu told him that she had been plotted against by Pei Fong. She just wanted to tell him that she would avenge him if there was a chance. Nongzhu was ready to die. Ancestor Nanming suddenly looked at Nongzhu. He and Nongzhu were old friends, but he didn't understand why Nongzhu thought that Yu Qianqiu could escape and have a chance to avenge him. In addition to Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan and Ouyang were also eyeing him covetously. Of course, he didn't know that Bai Changchun had once told Nongzhu that Yu Qianqiu was more resistant to death than the two of them. It seemed that he had a treasure to protect him, which made it difficult for others to kill him. Therefore, he pinned his hope on Yu Qianqiu. Don't talk nonsense. I'll take care of your disciple for you. Pei Fong suddenly burst out a terrible momentum, and the airflow around him spread out like visible waves. Hua Rui suddenly grabbed Jasper Flower Fairy's arm, looking very nervous. If it was before, they might not know who Pei Fong was. But since the cultivation world of Huaxia extended its tentacles, they naturally heard of this master at the last stage of Huaxia. He was one of the legendary top 10 masters. Could Nongzhu deal with him? Damn it. Damn fatty, just you wait and see. Yu Qianqiu cursed in his heart and prepared to escape with Nongzhu. He couldn't let Nongzhu die in Pei Fong's hands. As for the Nanming Patriarch, as one of the four great men, Pei Fong didn't dare to hurt him easily. He just had to take Nongzhu away. After all, he didn't know much about the Nanming Patriarch. The fewer people who knew about the secret of Utopia, the better. However, at this critical moment, a figure suddenly teleported over and stood in front of Nongzhu. He sneered at Pei Fong and said, "Pei Fong, you're going too far. Bai Changchun just left, and you're doing this. It's really disappointing. I'll be the first one who can't stand it anymore." It was Hu Changshou, who had been standing at the side without saying a word. Nongzhu, Yu Qianqiu, and the Nanming Patriarch looked at each other. They didn't expect Hu Changshou to come out to help. It was too surprising. Especially Yu Qianqiu. He had a feud with the Yun Palace, and Hu Changshou had wanted to kill him for a long time. Why did he come out to help now? This was simply too inconceivable. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were at a loss. When did Hu Changshou become a Samaritan? Didn't he know that Pei Fong, Ouyang and Qi Jiujuan were on the same side? Did he have the ability to fight the three of them alone? Hu Changshou. Pei Fong was stunned at first, then he sneered and said, "When did you wear the same side as Nongzhu? You came here to act like a hero. I hope you don't run later." Hee hee. "We didn't look for you, but you came to die. Great. Today is a good day to settle the score between us." As soon as he finished speaking, Qi Jiujuan and Ouyang had already flashed over. They stared at Hu Changshou with killing intent. Seeing that a battle was inevitable, everyone slowly retreated. A battle between soul formation final stage experts was no joke. Hu Changshou said calmly, "Settle the score." "I don't know who will settle the score. Even if I don't stop you, you probably don't have the guts to touch them. If you're not afraid of that person from the demon domain, go ahead and attack." Ha! Pei Fong's fat face shook as he cackled, "Hu Changshou, I think you're out of your mind. Bai Changchun has already gone to the East Holy Land, and you're still using him to scare us. Now, the demon domain." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly felt as if someone was strangling his neck. He couldn't laugh anymore, and the fat on his face stiffened. Qi Jiujuan and Ouyang expressions also changed abruptly, as if they remembered something. "Laugh. Why aren't you laughing anymore? Fatty Pei, continue laughing." Hu Changshou sneered and said, "I think you're too excited. It's true that Bai Changchun left, but don't forget that the demon domain torturers are passed down from generation to generation. If one Bai Changchun leaves, there's always another Bai Changchun." Every torturer of the demon domain torturer was a figure whose name shook the world. For countless years, no one had ever been able to resist the demon domain. Fatty Pei, if you have the guts, then do something. I don't believe that the current torturer can watch the previous torturer's disciple get bullied. I'd like to see if you can survive a month after you touch Yu Qianqiu. Sigh. Really, why do I have to remind you that some people are restless and like to look for excitement? The feudal lords fell silent. They realized that everyone was too excited. How could they forget this? Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu looked at each other speechlessly. The two of them didn't even think of using the demon domain torturers to scare them, because they knew that the current torturers couldn't do anything to them. Who knew that Hu Changsho would come out and make a big show of himself? They didn't expect it to work. Yu Qianshou's eyes lit up slightly, and he had a plan in his heart. The expressions on Pei Fong and the other two's faces were complicated. They'd said what they wanted to say, and they'd also taken a stance. Now, they were in a difficult position. However, Pei Fong's skin wasn't just ordinarily thick. He immediately laughed and said, "Brother Hu, look at what you're saying. Brother Yu and I hit it off when we were in the cornucopia. Why would I harm him? I'm just afraid that he'll be sad to see Master leave, so I purposely joked with him." Then, he waved his hand at Nongzhu and Yu Qianshou and said, "Brother Nongzhu, Brother Yu, don't take it to heart. I was just joking with you." Even Ouyangde and Qi Zhejuan squeezed out a few smiles. It's not without reason that he's fat. He's thick-skinned, Hu Changsho said sarcastically. However, Pei Fong was really thick-skinned, so he didn't care about his sarcasm. He said with a smile, "From what Brother Hu said, do you know who the current torturer of the demon domain is?" Hu Changsho snorted coldly and didn't answer. In fact, he didn't know who the current torturer of the demon domain was. The reason why he stood out to help Nongzhu and Yu Qianshou now was because he had his own plans. Now that Yin Baikong was dead, and Bing Qingzi believed that Yan Zhuixing was haunted and had a tendency to be independent, he was no different from a loner now. The next target of Pei Fong and the others would definitely be him, so he had to find a way to protect himself. Just when he didn't know what to do, Pei Fong and the other two gave him a chance to get closer to Nongzhu and Yu Qianshou by forsaking their former enmity. He could also see that Nongzhu's cultivation was probably not far from breaking through to the late stage of deity transformation. If he could take this opportunity to form an alliance with Nongzhu, he might be able to pull Wen Lanfeng in. Maybe he could also build a relationship with the demon domain, and then he wouldn't have to be afraid of Fatty Pei and the others. As for whether it would work or not, it was another matter. Even if it didn't work, he had to give it a try. At least, people like Nongzhu valued friendship and would return it when they owed a favor. Haha. Brother Hu is really tight-lipped. Pei Fong smiled to cover up his embarrassment and turned to ask Yu Qianshou, "Brother Yu, may I know who the current torturer of the demon domain is?" "Don't get me wrong, we just want to know who it is so that we can congratulate him for taking over the demon domain, so that we can call him by his name when we meet. That's all." Damn it. You turn hostile faster than turning a page. Once I say that I'm the new torturer, you'll turn hostile again. Yu Qianshou sneered, "I'd better not say his name, so as not to scare you. You'll naturally know who he is when there's a chance." Pei Fong's expression froze, and he, Ouyangde and Qi Zhejuan looked at each other. The three of them racked their brains, but they couldn't think of anyone's name that could scare him except by Changchun. Could it be Wen Lanfeng? It seemed that there was no one in the cultivation world who could make them worry, except for Wen Lanfeng. Could there be a master that they didn't know? Chapter 714. After a moment of hesitation, Qi Zhejuan sent a voice transmission to his two companions. "I don't know if he's telling the truth. Whether he's telling the truth or not, we can't afford to take that risk. It's easy to find out if he's telling the truth. Let's go to the demon ghost realm and have a look. If it's true, we'll talk about it later. If it's false, we don't have to rush to deal with them." "I don't think they can run away now," Pei Fong said. After a while of discussion, the three of them reached an agreement. Patting his belly, Pei Fong laughed at the crowd and said, "The new punishment enforcer of the demon ghost domain has been replaced. After sending Bai Changchun away, we should go congratulate the new punishment enforcer for taking over the demon ghost domain. I wonder if everyone would like to go with us." The lords exchanged glances. They had been living together in the cultivation world for so many years, and they all knew what kind of person Pei Fong was. They all knew what he wanted to do. He just wanted to see if the current torture master of the demon ghost realm was easy to bully. If he was easy to bully, Pei Fong and the other two would not go to congratulate him but to send him off. The reason why he wanted to gather everyone was probably because he had the mentality that the law couldn't punish too many people. No matter how powerful the torture master of the demon ghost realm was, it was unlikely that he could kill all the soul formation cultivators in the world. But then again, everyone wanted Pei Fong and the other two to have the ability to send the current torture master off. Without the suppression of the demon ghost realm, everyone's life would be better. Otherwise, no one would feel comfortable with a pair of terrifying eyes staring at them from behind. Even if a fight really broke out, there was someone who stood up for them, and they didn't need to do anything. They could even watch the show. Why not? Someone immediately shouted, "Yes, it's common sense to say goodbye to the old and welcome the new. We should go to the demon ghost realm to congratulate him." With one person taking the lead, everyone followed. Good, good, good. Pei Fong looked at the crowd with a smile and then cupped his hands to Nongzhu and the others, saying, "Guys, it's just a misunderstanding. Please don't take it to heart. We've sent Bai Changchun away. We'll go to the demon ghost realm to congratulate the new torture master. Goodbye." He did not expect Nongzhu and the others to be kind to him. As soon as he finished his words, he flew away with Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda. The lords also bid farewell to Nongzhu and the others. In the blink of an eye, all the lords of the soul formation stage had left, leaving only 3 dead bodies on the sea. The people of the Chinese cultivation world heaved a sigh of relief. They had thought that they were going to face a disaster today. They didn't expect that they would be lucky enough to get through it. After this lesson, they realized that everyone's thinking was simply too naive. Spirit-severing experts simply wouldn't put them in their eyes. Not to mention Bai Changchun, no matter how much Feng Xiangtian shouted, Bai Changchun wouldn't even look him in the eye, let alone talk to him. Everyone was still in shock and didn't dare to stay any longer. Besides, the 2 soul formation stage experts in front of them also didn't take them seriously. If they stayed any longer, who knew what other accidents would happen? Thus, one by one, they carefully excused themselves and quickly left with their tails between their legs. They had come with hope, but in the end, they discovered that everything was just a bubble, and they had to go back and find another way out. Reality was always cruel and could easily destroy all beautiful dreams. Of course, there were people who didn't leave. The flying ritual implement of the Moon Clan didn't move at all. Jade Flower Fairy and the others faced the sea breeze, the corners of their white dresses fluttering in the wind as they looked over quietly. However, Nongzhu deliberately ignored them. She held the flute with her hands behind her back expressionlessly and looked into the distance. However, the fingertips of her slender fingers that were holding the flute were deeply embedded in the flesh of her palm. Who asked that relationship to leave such a deep scar in the hearts of a man and a woman? They wanted to forget it, but when they thought about it, they realized that it was all hatred. They didn't know that it was because they loved each other so deeply that they were hurt so deeply and hated each other so much. The people of the Sword Clan didn't leave either. The leader of the Sword Clan looked at Nanming Ancestor and Nongzhu uneasily. He wanted to go up and talk to them, but he realized that they didn't even look at him. Thus, he cupped his hands at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Yu Qianqiu, my clan is very grateful for your help this time. I really don't know how to repay you." In fact, Yu Qianqiu didn't only save his clan. If it weren't for Yu Qianqiu's interference, the other soul formation lords wouldn't have let these Huaxia cultivators go at all, not to mention Yan Ji. Yu Qianqiu glanced at him coldly, then looked at Tu Yanfeng and said with a faint smile, "Elder Tu, I fulfilled my promise back then. From now on, we don't owe each other anything." Tu Yanfeng cupped his hands and thanked him, sweating profusely. The leader of the Sword Clan's expression changed slightly. He squeezed out a smile and wanted to continue their relationship. Unexpectedly, Nongzhu glared at him coldly and said indifferently, "If you don't scram, you'll die." Immediately, the leader was so scared that he shivered. He threw out his flying magic tool and quickly escaped with a few people. Looking at the group of black dots disappearing in the distant sky, Nanming Ancestor sighed and said, "It's a pity that Bai Changchun left. If he was still here, they wouldn't have dared to do this." A group of fickle villains. None of them are good people. It's useless to be angry. Nongzhu turned to look at Yu Qianqiu and asked worriedly, they've all gone to the demon realm. What are you going to do? Yu Qianqiu turned a deaf ear to her and stared at the surface of the sea with bright eyes. Suddenly, he flew over quickly and landed on the surface of the sea. He drove the waves and searched for a few storage pouches from the corpses of Hua Zongming and the other two. After checking them one by one, he instantly beamed with joy. Ignoring the shocked gazes of the crowd, he directly stuffed the pouches into his arms and flew back. What did you say just now? Yu Qianqiu asked, patting the things under his chest. Nongzhu's face suddenly became long and she roared, Pei Fong and the others have gone to the demon realm. What are you going to do? Not to mention the matter of Jasper Flower Fairy, he was upset at the thought that Shantian Island would be trampled by those people. However, as the current punishment envoy, Yu Qianqiu was still greedy for petty gains. How could he not be angry? Yu Qianqiu looked back at the sky and sneered, let them go. There are people on Shantian Island who can deal with them. He had already thought about it. If he couldn't handle it himself, he would immediately bring Bai Changchun back. He was not afraid of who. Nongzhu was stunned and asked in surprise, who? Nanming Ancestor also couldn't help asking, is it Wen Lanfeng? Yu Qianqiu's mouth curled up into a smirk and said, much more powerful than Wen Lanfeng. It turned out that he was already prepared. No wonder he was not in a hurry. Nongzhu and Nanming Ancestor looked at each other and asked at the same time, who is it? You will know when the time comes. Hee hee. I want to give them a surprise. Yu Qianqiu didn't want to be entangled in this topic. He tilted his head and winked at Nanming Ancestor, saying, Senior Nanming, is this how you treat your guests? Nanming Ancestor was stunned and looked in the direction he was hinting at. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, saying, my bad, my bad. I should have left our distinguished guest aside. He raised his hand and invited, Jasper Flower Fairy, please come to the island and have a chat. Nongzhu's expression twitched and she stared at Nanming Ancestor with a twisted face. She was really worried that this old guy had some designs on Jasper Flower Fairy, as Yu Qianqiu had said. Although she didn't want to have anything to do with Jasper Flower Fairy now, she didn't want Nanming Ancestor to have any designs on her. Jasper Flower Fairy bowed to Nanming Ancestor and then put away the flying celestial device under her feet. They landed on the island. However, from the moment they landed, Jasper Flower Fairy's eyes were fixed on Nongzhu's face, while Nongzhu turned her head indifferently. When Patriarch Nanming saw this scene, he snickered. Yu Qianqiu slowly moved backward. Jasper Flower Fairy, with her beautiful hair in a bun, suddenly said, should I call you Mr. Nongzhu or Xiaoyao? Nongzhu didn't look back. She snorted and said, it doesn't matter what you call me. There is no need to call me anything. Jasper Flower Fairy gritted her teeth and said word by word, you have been lying to me from the beginning. Nongzhu suddenly turned back and sneered, this should be applied to you. At the very least, from the moment we met, I told you my real name, and your name is fake. You didn't even give me a chance to find you again. Jasper Flower Fairy gnashed her teeth. Nongzhu sneered and said, what's the point of talking about this now? Then give me back my purple dress. Jasper Flower Fairy suddenly shouted. Her voice was so sharp that it shocked Nanming Ancestor and Yu Qianqiu. She was a great beauty after all, but now she didn't care about her image at all. She seemed to be crazy. Hua Rui, who was at the side, knew the relationship between the two. But the other elder of the Moon Clan was dumbfounded. Although he heard something, he couldn't believe that the leader dared to shout at a soul formation cultivator. Nongzhu said coldly, purple dress? Who is Purple Dress? I don't know her. Go find someone you know. Don't come to me. You. Jasper Flower Fairy almost went crazy. She wanted to rush up and fight with Nongzhu. Luckily, Hua Rui held her back. Jasper Flower Fairy suddenly turned back and shouted, Yu Qianqiu. She wanted to ask Yu Qianqiu to come out and testify, but Yu Qianqiu didn't see her. Instead, he saw a figure jump into the sea, probably never to show up again. Who else could it be except Yu Qianqiu? When Jasper Flower Fairy mentioned purple dress, he felt something was wrong. He didn't want to get involved in the couple's fight. It was better to run away. Besides, he had something to do and it was not convenient for him to stay here. Jasper Flower Fairy was stunned. Then she turned back and loosened her teeth. She begged, "Mr. Nongzhu, please give me back my purple dress, please." Humph. Nongzhu snorted and said, "Purple dress will never go with you. Anyway, I won't let purple dress follow the Moon Clan disciples' fate of abandoning their husband and children. Let your women follow the rules of the Moon Clan. Don't drag purple dress into it. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." He didn't like the Moon Clan disciples who brought their daughters to the clan and abandoned their sons and husbands when they had sons. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.